Hello there, and welcome to What's the Point? A question we should all be asking ourselves, and the podcast by brand architect Bill Ellis that will help you discover, clarify, and live your purpose.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to What's the Point? And as I have every episode, another amazing, terrific guest. His name is Peter Docker. Hello, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Bill. It's a delight to be with you on your show.
Well, thank you. Let me help people understand a little bit more about you. So Peter loves to lift others up so that they can be extraordinary. He spent 25 years in the Royal Air Force. As you can tell from his brief comment, he's got a bit of an accent, or he might say that we do, which is what my wife tells me. I've got the accent. But over the past 14 years, he's partnered with business leaders from around the world, learning from some of the world's most successful CEOs and leading national figures. He's excited to help others to learn from his experiences as they continue on their Jumpseat Leadership journey. And that is quite an introduction, I think. So again, Peter, I look forward to our conversation.
Well, likewise, Bill, and thank you for that. And I must just jump in there. Helping others to be extraordinary, that sounds like a bold claim in many ways, but extraordinary means different things to different people, and what's extraordinary for one isn't necessarily extraordinary for another, but it's when people can bring to the world their best and feel fulfilled by what they do. And I approach life from the perspective that we all have extraordinary talents, extraordinary contributions we can make to others, and it's sometimes just a case of uncovering those.
That's almost worth the time to listen. I could almost say, and that's it for today. That's an incredible observation, one I agree with, quite frankly. Extraordinary is one of those words that seems big, but it's very subjective, and it's also applicable to individuals in different ways. So what's extraordinary for myself might be every day for someone else.
Of course.
And that's what we have to keep in mind. So I love how you take that approach, which is going to help people change or expand their perception of things. The other thing I love about this introduction, where it says you've spent 14 years working with people around the world, learning from some of the world's most successful CEOs and leaders.
Yeah.
Most people that I speak with say, yes, I've worked with them to help them get along. And I know that that's part of what you do, but to take the perspective of, yeah, I learned so much from these people is truly unique. Share with us a little bit more about just that perspective.
Well, I think one of the greatest things we can bring to the world is curiosity. Whoever we are, whatever field we're in, if we remain curious, then we tend to learn. And I think when I'm sharing ideas with others, that's where I approach it with curiosity, because I always tend to learn something. And that is why I love conversations like this with you, Bill, because the questions you ask, I've never been asked that question before, for example. It has me think a little bit deeper about what makes me tick and how I can help others and bring a few ideas and share them with the world. So yes, I always learn, and I feel as I've had a hugely privileged life in so many ways. I spent 25 years in the Royal Air Force traveling the world. Since then, I've been in business, in consulting, working in every industry and sector you can imagine in about 93 countries. And what makes each of those experiences unique is the people I meet. Different cultures, different perspectives, different views of the world. And when I work with them, I listen with curiosity, then it's inevitable that I learn something. And that's part of the fun. That's what puts a smile on my face, quite literally, as you can see now.
Yeah. So everyone on YouTube, there is a great big glowing smile, and it's contagious, because I believe I'm smiling big now. So let me just jump back quickly to our first comment about extraordinary. So I've been able to travel more than ever in the past 10 years internationally. So I'm here thinking that having gone to 14, 15, maybe 20 different countries is extraordinary. And then I hear you say you've been to 93. And that just sums up the point that what's extraordinary for me, that's extraordinary for me. That is extraordinary for me.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily for you. It maybe was when you were at 20 countries, but it's that really resonated with me when you said that, just to make that example. But let me get to something that is very pertinent to our conversation, and that is the fact that Peter is many things, including an author, and his current book is Leading from the Jump Seat. And it's a fascinating read, and it's filled with information. We'll get into a little bit more of that. But I think it's really important for everyone to understand just the concept of leading from the jump seat. I won't give the book away, but the first chapter does have a brilliant story and an example of what leading from the jump seat means. But you explain it to us however you choose, please, Peter.
Well, I think I will touch on that story. And anybody listening who hasn't read the book, there are lots more stories in there. Each story's got a point.
Yes, there are.
And the point is always around leadership, about how we relate to one another and how we can create extraordinary opportunities through the way we relate. And the title of the book came from a time, or was inspired by a time in my career when I was a professional pilot. I flew with the Royal Air Force. And at the time, I was quite a senior officer, and I was checking the performance of other pilots. And I was checking this one pilot by the name of Calum, who'd been a first officer, a co-pilot for many years, and who was just completing his training to become a captain. And you complete a course of around about 6 months, learning everything you need to know about being a captain in charge of the aircraft. And the final part of the conversion to captain was where I came in. I would monitor Calum as he flew from London over to Washington, DC, and then up to San Francisco. And it was the final check to make sure that he was good to fly this aeroplane anywhere in the world with 140 passengers on board. And as we flew into San Francisco, it's a very busy airport, and Calum did a great job. He landed, we taxied in, shut down, the passengers got off, and I said, Calum, great job, you're fully signed up now. Tomorrow when we fly back, we're going to stay here the night, but tomorrow when we fly back, I'll be down the back with the rest of the passengers. You'll have a regular co-pilot with you, and you can fly us back to Washington and then on to London. And it was a great moment because, you know, he'd worked hard for this. And I knew that he could handle any situation, really. That's why I'd signed him up. The following morning, Calum was doing his pre-flight planning, and he came to me and he said, "Excuse me, sir." And he said, "Sir," because we're in the military and I was several ranks higher than him, and that was the culture. And he said, "Look, it's very busy here out of San Francisco during the morning rush hour. Would you mind coming and sitting on the jump seat for takeoff, just to act as an extra pair of eyes to watch out for other traffic as we maneuver on the ground and make our way to the runway?" And I said, "Yes, Captain, of course." And that was a good idea, I felt. It was also courageous because it had people like me on his shoulder for months. And this was his first opportunity to get me off his back, as it were, and just do his thing. But no, he was connected to the, if you like, the higher purpose, which was the safety of the aircraft and everybody on board. So I went and sat on the jump seat, and the jump seat is a third seat on most large aircraft flight decks. You've got the two pilot seats, the captain and the co-pilot, and the jump seat is immediately behind. If you're sat on there, you can reach forward and you can touch the pilot. You're that close. And it's not available for passengers. It's there for crew members hitching a ride or whatever. So that's where he wanted me to sit, because I'd have a great view out the front and would be able to contribute in some way. So I strapped in and we taxied out to the runway. And Calum did a great job. You know, I didn't need to intervene. I didn't expect to. But we went onto the runway. It was our turn to get airborne. And we had clearance to take off. We thundered down the runway. And we got airborne, and it was all going very well. But around about 300 or 400 feet, we had an emergency. And what I then chose to do in the next 2 seconds would dictate whether we survived or not. And here's the thing, I did absolutely nothing. I sat there with my hands in my lap, perfectly calm. Calum was wrestling with the controls because he needed to make that input. But I sat there quite calm, quite quiet, because in that moment, I didn't need to lead. I needed to be a great follower. And what that looked like was for Calum to feel that I had his back and to stay out of his way so he could do his job. And so that gave rise to this notion later on in me about leading from the jump seat, because, you know, it's inevitable in life that we will hand over control at some stage. We will. You know, if we're the CEO of a company, we'll retire at some stage. If we are leading a team, chances are we'll move on to another team. Or heck, as a parent, you know, our kids grow up and eventually leave home and go to lead their own lives. You know, we take a step back. So leading from the jump seat is all about grasping that inevitability and working with it. And jump seat leadership is not about, retaining or increasing our own power. It's about empowering others and preparing them for that moment when they are in the lead, they take control, and they then can carry forward those things that we feel are deeply important to us, that really matter, probably things that we've been working on for many years in our own lives. So that's what leading from the jump seat is all about. And it's not just about taking that step back. It's about when you lead with that intention of preparing others, lifting others up, then it tends to open up extraordinary opportunities where your performance as a team really accelerates. So that's what jump seat leadership is all about.
Well, again, it's a brilliant story. And as you said, those of you listening, I urge you to get the book, read the book, because that's just chapter 1, the first story in chapter 1. And it's a pretty comprehensive book with 12 chapters and then some epilogues. So there's plenty of stories, there's plenty of lessons. And so, well, just the general contents, it's broken into several sections. So I just want to touch on that. It covers the introduction, setting the context, but then it talks about commitment. There's a section on humble confidence, and then there's a section on belonging. Speak to those, please.
Of course. So I wanted to identify 3 buckets, if you will, that I could share the things that I've learned and help people to put them into action, because this book isn't just my stories. It's a practical how-to book, how to put these concepts, ideas into action. And the first part of the book, as you rightly say, Bill, is all around the notion of commitment and what is commitment. And what I dig into there is really taking a deep dive into what's really important to us as individuals, an individual. You know, what rhetorical question, Bill, but what's really deeply important to you as a human being? And the reason I dig into that is because when we get very clear on what's important to us at a deep level, it unlocks enormous amount of energy to move forward against adversity. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I received a phone call from my wife, and her voice was shaky. She'd just been involved in a car accident. And it was only a couple of miles away from here. And so I dropped everything and jumped in my car to go and help my wife. Now, a couple of things I observed looking back at that. First of all, nothing would have prevented me from dropping everything and going and supporting my wife. Nothing, you know. Why? Because, like many people, family is really important to me. Yeah. So that always comes first. And people who I was on a call at the time, and they immediately understood that I had to go, no questions asked. But the second thing that I noticed is that I was stepping into uncertainty. I had no idea what I would find when I got to where my wife was, or what I'd have to deal with. None. And yet that did not stop me moving forward. And it made me reflect, well, you know what, if we can identify other things that are those non-negotiables that are deeply important to us, then we can harness that energy to help us move forward into the unknown. And that is an important part of leadership, moving forward when we don't know what we're stepping into, or we're creating something new. And so that's what the first part of the book is about, to give us techniques to put into words what drives us. And I talk about stands. There is a difference between a stand and a position. A position is against something or someone. And we only need to open the newspaper or look on the internet to find lots of positions being taken against people or against ideas. And that's fine, it's human nature, but it's kind of limiting. And the reason it's limiting is that a position can only exist when there's a counter position, another view. If a counter position isn't there, then our position, it can't exist. But there is an alternative, and that is what I call a stand. A stand is for something. And the benefit of a stand is that it doesn't depend on anyone else or anything else to exist. It's what you stand for. And this is the progression from when we figure out and put into words what's deeply important to us. They can then turn into stands. Those non-negotiables, and we might have several of them. For me, and I explain how these have come about in the book, but for me, one, yes, family. Another is a stand for mutual respect between people. Another is not being a burden on other people and being able to support others. These are non-negotiables for me. And why they are really useful is because those stands, when I'm working in the unknown or at a time of uncertainty, they give me a handrail, something to fall back on, something to guide me. But then it leads to commitments, because when we take those stands and we turn them into commitments, that's when it becomes dynamic. And there's a lot written about commitments, but for me, a commitment is something very simple. It's a promise we make to ourselves, not to anybody else, but to ourselves, to carry through, to carry forward something. Let's take a simple example, something that comes up quite often this time of year. People will choose in January to give something up, perhaps smoking. I've never smoked, but some people, they decide that January is the time they're going to kick the habit. And they might tell other people about it. But unless they've made that deep down commitment, that deep down promise to themselves, they're unlikely to carry through. And in business, we can make commitments on paper in terms of contracts, but unless we have a deep down commitment promise to ourselves to carry through, we're unlikely to do so. We'll always find a way to wriggle out. So this is a progression, and this is what the first book is about. First part of the book is about, getting clear on what's deeply important to us, those non-negotiables, putting them into words so they become stands, part of our character, who we are, the guiding handrail for us in times of uncertainty. And then, should we choose, we can take those stands and turn them into commitments, which is putting them into action. And that can be in our life in general or in business. And the reason that is the bedrock of leadership, of Jumpseat Leadership, is that I believe we need to understand and lead ourselves better so as we can then better lead others. And there's no other time that's more important for being able to lead ourselves than in times of uncertainty, when we are stepping into the unknown. And that's what the whole first part of the book is about, giving us that foundation. So I'll pause there, Bill, because I'm conscious I've spoken a lot here, but I know we have the other two aspects, humble confidence and belonging, and maybe we can come on to those, but I'll pause for a moment. Oh, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Oh, let's try it that way.
There we
Sorry, I hit mute because I had a bit of a cough. Speaking of having to give up smoking some 25 years ago, and that cough still.
Oh,
Anyway,
bless your heart.
so I'm glad that you spoke because you brought so much wisdom and clarity to the whole purpose of 75 pages of a book, which is going to give people more reason to dig into the book. What I do want to say, though, is what you were mentioning, Peter, is it just folds perfectly into the purpose of this podcast, which is titled "What's the Point?" And my belief that we need to find our purpose, and we have more than one purpose, but understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it, as I see it, ignites our passion, which then is the fuel to commit to that. Whatever the item might be, or the stand. I love that stand versus position. So yeah, I think that what you're talking about is spot on with the purpose of my effort here with this podcast, and I thank you for that. So now that I've realized to hit the unmute button, maybe a good segue to the next section of the book, which is humble confidence. I'm confident that we'll still have a good show.
Well, yes, let's use that segue to humble confidence. Everything that we do in life that's important to us, Bill, everything is driven by one of two things. It's driven either by fear or it's driven by love. Everything. Now this we can perhaps relate to that in our personal lives, but let's put this in a business context too. If we are driven by fear, then our view of the world will be one of scarcity, of winner takes all, losers. We've got to be the winner, and there's only one winner. But also fear can generate other feelings inside of us. A focus on self, ego. That's what ego means, self. Where we shut down our thinking about others, our care for others. It's all about me. And that's not helpful. It really isn't, and it's not sustainable. It's understandable, because when fear is triggered inside of us, fear is an instinctive thing. It kicks in when our life is in danger. And that's okay, because that helps us step back out of the road when there's suddenly an oncoming car. It saves our life. But fear can also kick in when we sense that our livelihood, our status, or our reputation is under threat. And that's when just thinking about ourselves is not helpful, particularly in a team or in business, because it generates these drivers of ego and self-serving. But there is a choice, and we always have a choice. And that is instead to choose love. Now, as I say, it gets people in business twitchy when I start talking about love. But what love looks like in business is, instead of focusing on just yourself, you're focusing on others, in service of others. Those could be the people in your team, and those could be the customers that you serve. It has you look at the world as a place of possibility, an opportunity rather than scarcity. That's the way we view the world. It's a view of the world where there can be lots of winners, not just us. There's room for everybody, because there truly is. And instead of ego, the antidote to ego is what I call humble confidence. And humble confidence is the approach where we're willing to listen to others. We have that humility, and yet we are resolute where we're heading, the reason we're doing what we're doing. And also we're absolutely ready to make the decisions when they need to be taken. But it opens up other possibilities when we lead with humble confidence, because it draws in the people on our team who can help contribute to the solutions to the challenges that we're facing, we can then tap into what I call the collective genius of our team. But unless we have humble confidence, that really isn't an option. If we're leading from a place of fear rather than love, if we're leading from a place of ego as our driver rather than humble confidence, then we do not create an environment where people will choose to step forward to help us, where people will choose to contribute on our team to solve the problems that we're facing. So that's the second section of the book, humble confidence, how to identify it, how to practice it, and importantly, what it then opens up in terms of possibility for your team, for your organization.
Well, so far, as we've discussed, I don't ever have set questions, but I do write down a few things that I want to cover. And so far, two of the things I've written down, you've brought up without my prodding, so that makes what I'm doing that much easier. And that is, there are several instances in the book where you talk about choosing love over fear. One of the statements is love is the antidote to ego. You give several examples of love, and in the context of humble confidence, there's a phrase that I've learned several years ago and that I embrace because it's something I need to be cautious of, and the gist of the quote is contempt prior to investigation. And I think fear drives contempt prior to investigation. If I don't know what's going on and I have my opinion, then I kind of feel as though I have control over something. Whereas if I'm willing and confident enough that if I learn something new, it doesn't devalue me, but in actuality, it will value me. And the worst thing that can happen is that I can validate that what my beliefs were in the first place were correct, but not just based on ego.
Absolutely. And building on what you've just said there, Bill, this is where the previous part of our conversation comes in. When we're clear on what's deeply important to us, what our stands are, that gives us the courage for humble confidence, and that's the thing that links fear and love. It's courage. Courage can't exist without fear, but it can only be sustained through love. And the opportunity that I put forward for Jumpseat Leadership is we're never going to get away from fear. I've started to write a piece just this week on challenging the notion of fearless leaders, actually totally fearless leaders, because I'm not sure I want to follow someone who has got no fear of losing anything. That suggests that they don't care. So fear is something that should exist, but it's about how you choose to respond to that fear. Do you choose to respond to it through being driven by ego and thinking of yourself and closing down possibilities, or do you choose to see fear as a warning flag to respond differently? So let me give you a very real example which is close to my heart. During my time in the military, I found myself in combat situations. And I flew large, unarmed, undefended aircraft which acted as air refueling aircraft, giving gas to other planes in the sky. And we flew around in circles, and this was during the Iraq War in 2003. We flew around in circles giving fuel away, and we often got shot at, which wasn't great. But to do that, what was I totally unafraid? Of course I wasn't. But actually, what replaced that fear was the love of supporting the people who are depending on us to do our job. And in our case, if we didn't refuel those fighter jets, our troops, and by our troops, I'm talking about those wearing British, American, and Australian uniforms, who are on the ground in Iraq, they wouldn't get the air support they needed. And if they didn't get the air support they needed, they would likely die. So, we counteracted fear by being really connected to a higher purpose, being in service. It comes from a place of love, in service of others, who in this case we had never met, but absolutely depended on us doing our job. So this is the opportunity. When we feel triggered by fear. And especially in the normal working environment, is going to be when we sense our livelihood, our status, or our reputation is under threat. The opportunity is to see that as a warning flag, and instead to find the courage to choose love instead of fear to guide us, and open our way to using humble confidence to find the way forward. That's the opportunity.
Well, I love everything you just said, and I wished I could have heard that exact explanation probably 6 or so years ago when I started, which I wrote for years, a blog called Friday's Fearless Brand. And my definition of fearless in that context was exactly what you've just described. It didn't mean that there was no fear. It didn't mean that people were just overly confident without a concern in the world. What it had to do with is people and brands having realized what their intention is, and then how they go about doing it, overcoming and not being swayed or stymied by the things that are going to come up. So it's fear, facing fear, but facing fear with knowledge, and I wish I would have then had the insight to use the phrase love, because that's exactly correct. Let me stop just for a second from going through the sections of the book, because one thing I really love about the approach in this book, and it reinforces what it says, how much you are interested in lifting up others, and not just as a pilot. At the end of each chapter, there are 4 sections, and they're learning to fly, flying, teaching others to fly, and surprise, leading from the jump seat. Put some context, please, Peter, to those 4 elements, because it gives so much more purpose and the opportunity to create that much more value from what we get from reading this book and your examples.
Well, thank you for asking that, Bill, because I think it's important. You know, we're all on a journey. You, me, everyone listening, we're all on a journey in life. And it's perhaps an overused phrase, but I can't think of anything that replaces that phrase that serves us. And what I've done in the book is I've taken forward the metaphor of flying and the aircraft metaphor, because you know, the flight deck of a large aircraft, it's like a microcosm of leadership. And you can see some great leadership up there, and also some pretty poor leadership as well. So I thought I'd carry that metaphor through the book. And the 4 sections that you refer to recognize the different stages in life that we can find ourselves in. So learning to fly would typically be perhaps, in our late teens or early 20s, when we're trying to figure out what's really important to us. Yeah, those deeply held, those non-negotiables that we talked about earlier on this podcast, Bill. So that's us learning to fly. So at the end of each chapter, I give things to consider. I call it the Consider This part of the book, where if you're learning to fly, how you can use the ideas in the preceding chapter, how you can put them into practice, things you might like to consider. But then perhaps in our life journey, we've gone through college or whatever, we've figured out what's really important to us, and then we're starting a job, and we start to get really good perhaps in that chosen field. That's when we're flying. That's when we're in flow. And the focus is still primarily building our own foundation. But in the Consider This section at the end of each chapter, I give ideas of how we can put the principles that I offer into practice if you're actually in the place of flying. But then maybe after a few years we get promoted and we're no longer doing the main job that we started doing when we joined the company. Maybe now we have a team. And that's where we open up the opportunity to teach others to fly. And again, there's guidance at the end of each chapter of how we can put those ideas into practice when we're in that place. But then finally, maybe we get into a senior role. And perhaps we'll shortly be stepping back, either leaving the company or maybe even retiring. And that's when we have the opportunity to truly be focused on leading from the jump seat, where it's all about others. We've learned, we've had our experience. It's about sharing that experience with others, giving them the encouragement, and taking the step back from leading and being that great follower, so as they feel that you've got their backs. But here's the thing. We can be at different stages in different areas of our life. So tomorrow, for example, I'm going for a walk with someone that I mention in my book, Lieutenant General Sir James Dutton, KCB, CBE, very distinguished guy, been knighted twice by the Queen, which is quite a thing to be knighted once, let alone twice. He led British and American troops during the Iraq War, and I had the privilege of serving with him over 20 years ago when we worked in our Ministry of Defence together. And I hold him up as one of my, best examples of leading from the Jumpseat Leadership. He now is considerably older than I am, and he's retired. So while he was very much leading from the jump seat at the end of his military career and at the end of his subsequent commercial career, now he's learning to fly again, figuring out, what does being retired mean? What does that look like? What's next? Yeah. So we can be at different stages, at different parts, in different parts of our life. We might be teaching others to fly at work whilst learning to fly by picking up a hobby like scuba diving or whatever it is, And I think recognizing where we are in different aspects of our life, we can put the practices of jump seat leadership into play in different ways. I think that's the power of the consider this section at the end of each chapter.
And that's, again, one of the things I find most attractive and influential from the book. So I very much appreciate that approach. You had said through your comments on stages that perhaps at some point we achieve a senior position. And I know you mean more than just that. And I just want to clarify that for our listeners. Leading from the jump seat is applicable at any stage that we're at. When I was in high school, I worked at a supermarket and was in the produce department. And a new kid came in and I was he was learning to fly. And when he was ready to fly, and I was trying to teach him, I didn't lead from the jump seat. I was trying to tell him exactly how to do everything the way I did it. And as opposed to letting him take everything that had been given to him and then do it his way. And I think leading from the jump seat would have been a very valuable perspective at that point. So I bring that up both to tell a little bit on myself, but mainly just to say that this is applicable in any situation. Leaders are at every level of our life. We're leading somehow, some way, and I think that's applicable to everybody being a leader.
And I think just to further build on that, Bill, it really applies as well, being a parent. And many of us become parents, and I think that it is one of the greatest leadership challenges out there. I remember when we first became parents some 30 years ago, we hadn't got a clue what we were doing. But we were totally committed. We made that promise to ourselves. We're totally committed, my wife and I, to bringing up our kids in the best possible way we could. It meant that we had to have humble confidence to, listen and learn from friends, from relatives who had experience of being parents. We had to take that in. We had to be confident, not just humble, we had to be confident in our own ability as well. That humble confidence is not about being meek. That doesn't help anybody. It's about being confident in where you're strong too, as well as having the humility to listen. So we put into play all of the things that I talk about in leading from the jump seat. And in fact, there's quite a few examples in the book of how I use the principles to help in challenging parenting situations, where it created new opportunity at moments when we could close things down. And just looking at our children, they are both grown up, and my son, for example, is literally flying as a military pilot in the Royal Navy, which is great to see. But we helped them, we supported them when they were learning to fly, when they were flying, when they're teaching others to fly. and it's a huge privilege to be able to do that, as I feel many parents will experience, I hope. And leading from the jump seat gives us a framework to approach parenting in some ways too.
Another great observation. They talk about as parents, eventually our job is to lead our children to the point that they're able to leave the nest and fly on their own. So that kind of ties in as well.
And actually, Bill, sorry, could I just mention that? Because I think this is so important, and it's a great example. Even when they have flown the nest, our children now who are 29 and 30, it's not like that we've just waved goodbye to them.
Right.
We're still there. We're still, they can still come to us. They can still sense that we've got their backs, whilst they are absolutely, truly independent. And that's what I observe about great companies too. The most senior people in the company, they should be lifting up others so as they can do most of the leading, but equally, they haven't completely abdicated responsibility. Folks know that they're still there to help, to advise, to support. And that's really, really important.
It is. And excuse me, to tie back to the very opening story of the book and the podcast, your Colum, who said, will you come and sit in the jump seat? To me, that is as essential to jump seat leadership as anything, where people have confidence in you, that you have their back, literally, as you mentioned, that you're there to support them as needed, that they have the freedom and, in his case, the humble confidence to ask a senior officer if you will have my back. That's all very important, and it, to me, equates back to what you just described as far as children being able to come back to their parents.
It says, I didn't realize it fully at the time, I don't think, Bill, what that request from Calum asking me to come and sit on the jump seat, what that said about our relationship. That's it says a lot, and it meant that we'd built trust, mutual respect of one another over months and months and months. And if he didn't feel comfortable, he would never have invited me up there. And what a wasted opportunity that would have been. So, and it's same with our two children. They are super confident in what they're doing in their respective chosen careers. And yet sometimes they'll ask our advice. They will invite us in. And what a privilege that is. So when we can establish that in a work environment too, we know that we're on the right track. It's not about being perfect all the time. None of us are perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes, but what's important is what's our intention and what's the trend. Sometimes when we trip up and we're not the greatest jump seat leader, then that's okay, as long as our intention is true and the overall trend is heading in the right direction.
And that also ties back to what one of the things you said earlier of not falling into the trap of ego based on fear, but being able to accept that we're not perfect, that we are going to stumble and make mistakes, hopefully unintentionally more often than not, but regardless, to take ownership of that and then to say, how do we correct this and what have we learned from this is a whole different thing than making that mistake and then letting our ego and our fear of being judged or whatever the case might be from reaching out for help and for improving. So I think that's important, very important. There's one story I was going to ask you about, but in out of respect for your time, I think I'll hold off on that just for a second because I do want to get to the third section of the book, belonging. And again, rather than try to put my words into your work, talk to us about belonging.
I focused the whole last section of the book around this third leg of the stool, if you like, of belonging, because I've noticed what positive things happen when people feel that they belong. When they feel part of the tribe, when they feel part of the organization, wonderful things start to happen. By wonderful things, I'm talking about people choose to step up and take responsibility. And taking responsibility is so different from people being accountable, at least in my distinction of the terms. Accountability is given. I can make you as an employee accountable for delivering against key indicators. But it's only when people choose themselves to take responsibility for that it's likely to happen, or likely to happen well. And let's take a parenting example as well, because most people can relate to this. Way back when our children were very young, they used to play out in the quiet street, the cul-de-sac where we lived. They used to play with our neighbours' kids. And it was generally a very quiet neighbourhood, but occasionally a car would come round or a stranger. And if we saw that, then my wife and I would go out and take care not just of our own kids, we're accountable as their parents to take care of them, but we would also choose to take responsibility for our neighbours' kids too, and make sure they were safe. And the reason for that was that we felt that we belonged to the community. We felt part of it. And so we wanted to contribute. We wanted to step up and take responsibility. And organisations that nurture this sense of belonging, this is what starts to happen at scale. So I believe that it's really vitally important, or a role of anyone who chooses to lead, to nurture that sense of belonging. And the way we nurture that sense of belonging is, first of all, being very clear on what we're all at work on, and what's the picture on the box, where we're heading, what do we stand for as an organisation, as a team. That's important. But also, it's about enabling people to see how they can fit in, how they contribute, how they can bring their own expression of being extraordinary to the team, but also showing that we care. When we show that we care, that is the biggest lever we can use to help people feel that they belong. And showing that we care goes beyond empathy. Empathy can be, well, yeah, I get it. I can see from your perspective. But caring is when we choose to give up our time to be with that person. It doesn't mean to take a long time at all, but the more senior you are, even just a few seconds of time to check in with someone shows that we care. During the 2003 Iraq War, we were running 24/7 operations. But I would find time to sit down with the most junior people on my team and check in with them. How's things at home? Are you getting everything you need to do your job? It might not have taken longer than I've just spent now explaining it to you, Bill, but it showed them that I cared. And I did it out of true curiosity and true caring. It wasn't, a facade. And that then opened up possibility, because they choose to step forward in that situation and contribute more, take responsibility. So that's why the last section of the book is focused on belonging, because I think it's our role to nurture that sense of belonging, and then we can reap the benefits that it brings to our team.
Again, a powerful bookend, literally, bookend. And in the context of what you just said, Peter, to build on that, asking someone how they're doing and having them know you really care about the answer is what is so valuable. I know in the States it's pointed out to me often by people that, so you Americans often say, "How you doing?" And before you can answer, they're on to the next thing. And so I think it has good intentions, but it doesn't have the level of sincerity that you just described in your conversations. And like you said, it doesn't have to be long, but just helping someone to know that they're cared about, to have them feel seen, and their situation understood, matters quite a bit. And I think some of that might be what is driving, at least what in the States is being called the Great Resignation. I think a lot of people, because if you look at the areas of business that are being hurt the most, it's the service industry, it's food and
Yes.
beverage. It's that type of level where people just aren't appreciated.
Yeah.
So people can say, yeah, it's minimum wage is too low, which I agree with.
Mm.
But as much as anything, those people aren't seen or appreciated. They've been taken for granted so long. So now when people say, well, why aren't they coming back? Well, maybe the people asking the question need to look into their own
Yeah.
persona.
And I think just, well, here we are. We can start right now. Next time each of us goes to a restaurant, take the opportunity, as I do, when the woman or the guy comes up to serve me, I ask them, how's things? I say, look, I know it's tough in your industry at the moment. How's business here? How's things going? And just asking that out of true curiosity and care for that human being, because I know that it's been rough in many, well, sadly, in many restaurants, people suffer abuse from so-called customers. So just inquiring and showing that I care and I'm grateful for the service they provide, it helps to engender this sense of belonging within that little microcosm of that engagement of me with them. And I don't do it for this reason, but funny old thing, generally the service is pretty good. It's the same with the guy who delivers stuff to our door here. You know, it's tough. They work really hard. For every parcel they deliver, they get, a pittance, relatively speaking. And so I show my appreciation to them and say, thank you for the work that you do. I really appreciate it. And say it with meaning. And you can see the smile on the face because I don't hear that very often.
Yeah.
And it helps to nurture that sense of belonging they have and the contribution they make to the community. And that means that they'll step up. And that might just look like they choose to put the parcel out of the rain when I'm not in next time they deliver, So every little helps, and we can start right now how we choose to relate to others.
And sorry to interrupt, and I hope everyone does, because that's a practice I do as well. And along those lines, at this time of year, there have been a lot of packages arriving, and what they do here anyway, at least one delivery service, they ring the doorbell, not so you can sign for anything, just to let you know something's at the door. And I just happened to be by the front door, and I went outside, and the guy was walking down where I couldn't even see him, and I just shouted, "Thank you." And I got a response from him, and what turned out, he was bringing a second stack of gifts, and you could just see it on his face. It kind of helped make that little bit of his day better. So maybe the next parcel at the next person who he's never seen is delivered with a little bit more care because he's appreciated.
Yeah, and
you never know.
This is a fundamental principle, I think, of leadership for me. It's about being the pebble in the pond. When you throw a pebble in the pond, the ripples go out and you never actually know how far they go, how long they continue for. And in my experience, when I've been in senior roles that have called on leadership, things that people remember are the small, seemingly insignificant moments where perhaps, I don't even remember them, but remember the moment, but I've stopped and paused and checked in to see how things are going for them. And it just happened to be at the perfect time for them. And it helped to give them that little lift. And it's those things that they remember, so we never know how far those ripples will go. And I say that if we want to make a difference in the world, don't think big, think small. It's those small things that make all the difference, that can affect people's lives in such a positive way and can lift them up and help them be leaders too.
Well, when I got the response that you would be a guest, I knew this would be good and just filled with absolute gem after gem, and it certainly has been. I'm gonna make an assumption here, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I think that what you just said, being the pebble in the pond, is a function of humble confidence, where I'm confident that I can do something that may have a positive effect. And whether it does or not, it doesn't come back to me. It's just I know that I can help someone else. So one of my other practices is if I'm anywhere in public or in a business area and I see the person who's doing the cleaning, mopping a floor or in the public restroom, if there's a chance to do that without seeming creepy, I stop and say, I just want to thank you for your efforts to help keep this place so clean. and the smile on people's faces, and wow, someone noticed me. And who knows how much that may help that person and get spread to someone else. But I love your examples. I hope everyone takes your lead for that. But we're really running up against the time limit that I promised you would be at. And regular listeners know that I never end without this question. So everything we've talked about, your career in the military, your career in business, your non-negotiables, your commitment to help elevate people and to help them become extraordinary. When you put it all together, Peter, what's the point?
What's the point? It means that perhaps in a few years, when I do finally put my feet up in front of the fire, I can experience what I talk about in terms of success. Success for me is the joy that you feel when you go home at night. And what's the point? The point is making a difference in other people's lives. And it's the small stuff that matters, not the big stuff. And that's the point for me. To see what people go on to then achieve themselves in their life. That's pretty darn cool. And there's lots of examples of that in the book. That's what puts that smile on my face. And that for me is the definition of success.
Well, I will suggest to you that you'll sleep well tonight, because I can promise you that you have made an incredibly positive impact on me in the moment, and that you will make a very positive impact on everyone who listens to this podcast. And I suspect that many people are going to listen to it more than once, because there's so much knowledge and just powerful concepts in here that we can all learn from. So with that, Peter Docker, author of Leading from the Jump Seat. Link to that book will be in the show notes, and contact information for Peter will be as well. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's valuable. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for that smile that I've been able to see for the better part of an hour.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Bill. Thank you so much for your wonderful hosting and questions that helped me to explore a bit further and learn a bit myself. So thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We can promise you'll gain value in every one. Rating and reviewing makes us more discoverable and helps others find out what's the point. And if you'd like to know more about Bill Ellis or contact him, please visit his website, www.brandingpillars.com. See you next time.